What is going on? What is going on? It's your boy, Julien Stoutt, licensed personal trainer, licensed PE teacher, world record, powerlifter, special education teacher, here to take the fear out of fitness. We are about to take off and class is in session. So, this has been a week. I've been in a really craptacular mood. Obviously, a lot of things have happened since my long companion, my Chihuahua, Bella's gone. Things have not been quite the same for me. But at the same time, I'm very optimistic in what is to come in the future because that's all we can do. The one thing you will never see me do is stay on my back for long. I might hit my back. I might even fall on my face. But the one thing you will not see me do is stay on my back for long. If I'm on my back for that long, just know it is my time. My time is coming. Okay? But hopefully you guys have been checking me out on Instagram and on Facebook and on TikTok. As of late, I've been stepping my game up in the social media realm, showing you guys what it takes to approach the mindset, encouragement, accountability, and nutrition aspect of fitness, the cornerstones of what it is that I do on a regular basis, not only for myself, but for my clients as well. And as a matter of fact, not only for my clients, but also my students. I know the acronym seems like it is mean, but it is me basically taking and twisting the attitude towards people who are strict and hold you to a certain standard as mean, and letting you know that there's love in regards to that mindset, encouragement, accountability, and nutrition mindset. And with that, you can see the title in the thumbnails, which is Exercise Helps with ADHD/Autism. Now, why is that? How does that work? What does that get into? As a special education teacher, one of the things that is most important to me is that my students who suffer from some variation of an other health impairment, which is OHI, which is what we call a code of OHI, or ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. One of the things that we like to do is find alternative accommodations for students that are suffering from these things, so that way that they can actually find ways to actively participate inside of their education. That way that they don't seem like they are A, becoming nuisances, or B, they are not disruptive in the classroom. They are actually participating the best way that they can. And to be honest with you, this information that I'm providing you today, I should say the fact that exercise helps with autism and ADHD, is nothing new. But what is new, at least from my personal understanding, is how exercise helps with autism and ADHD. As someone who is both a physical education teacher and a special education teacher, I am a firm believer in physical activity to mitigate some of what is going on inside of our children's minds when they are suffering from a hyperactive episode, or they are perseverating in such ways where that they cannot function inside the classroom just yet. Believe it or not, some will turn around and accuse me of treating everything with exercise. And to be honest with you, they'd be, I'd say, 90% right. Sometimes medication is absolutely necessary, but exercise should be included at all times, because there's nothing like exercise affecting the human body. Does that mean that you're going to exercise profusely and become, ginormous and muscular or whatever? Maybe, maybe not. But understanding how to mitigate and control one's behavior when they're in an educational or a business or a professional setting is actually everything. And one of the reasons why I know this is because I have not been diagnosed with ADHD or autism, but I have taken a few tests, and those tests have pretty much declared that I have either ADHD, autism, or both. And one of the things that I can absolutely say for certain is that exercise helps me tremendously when it comes to moderating my emotions, being focused on tasks at hand, keeping my head in the game as opposed to bouncing off the walls and needing some sort of stimulus in order to function at any kind of normal level. Now, for those of you who do not have autistic children or do not have children in general, you might want to watch this episode because this might affect you in the future. Instead of thinking that you simply got some badass kids, or simply assuming that your child has deficiencies that cannot be helped, the truth is that your child can actually be more likely suffering from either autism or ADHD or a combination of both. And if you do not recognize that these are the things that your children are dealing with, you cannot give them the coping strategies necessary for them to be successful, not only in school, but in life. And needless to say, what I will tell you is that I personally struggled. And without knowing this information, without having this information at my disposal, without being able to particularly understand what my mind was doing or what my mind is doing, these types of things kind of put me at a disadvantage, both in an educational and in a professional setting. Am I using that as an excuse? No. However, what I would say is that it probably would have helped me a ton, if I had this information at my disposal at that time, meaning when I was younger. So, needless to say, let's get on to it. So let's get with the first article, which actually is a peer review article. It's the effects of acute aerobic exercise on response inhibition in adult patients with ADHD. So previous studies suggest beneficial effects of aerobic exercise on executive functions, which are a core deficit in ADHD. The aim of the present fMRI study was to investigate acute effects of aerobic exercise on inhibitory control and related brain activation in adult patients with ADHD. 23 patients and 23 matched healthy controlled performed on a go-no-go task in an MRI scanner, following both an exercise condition involving 30 minutes of cycling at a moderate intensity and a control condition. ADHD patients compared to the healthy control showed increased brain activation during successful inhibition in the exercise compared to the control condition parietal, temporal, and occipital regions. Exercise did not improve behavioral performance in either group, but in ADHD patients, exercise-related increases in brain activation and behavioral task performance, correction inhibition rate, negatively correlated with correct inhibition rate in the control condition. Thus, patients with worse inhibition performance showed stronger exercise-related enhancements, indicating that the lack of improvements on the behavioral level for those whole patient group could be due to ceiling effects. Our finding might be an important step in understanding the neural basis of exercise effects and could, in long term, help in developing alternative treatment approaches for ADHD. Basically, what they're saying is that you didn't see an improvement in either group because they both baselined at being able to function, whether they exercised in the ADHD group or didn't exercise in the healthy group. But what it does show is that the adults, the 23 adults that performed the exercises, were actually functioning at a deficit when they weren't exercising. So if that makes sense. So we'll get into it. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is most common neurobehavior disorder in children and adolescents and often persists into adulthood. Besides the core symptoms of inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity, many patients show deficits in executive functioning, response inhibition, i.e., the ability to inhibit prepotent responses in order to stop or select a more appropriate one, is one major component of executive functioning, meaning you are incapable, when you lack executive functioning, you lack the ability to stop or choose the appropriate behaviors when the choices are presented to you. When you are at a deficit, you can't pay attention to the task at hand. It is essential for adaptive behavior and plays an important role in successful completion of many everyday tasks. Reduced inhibitory control is viewed as a central deficit in ADHD, meaning you cannot control what stops you from doing stuff. So something that stops your attention, basically squirrel, I gotta go look at this. Numerous studies have demonstrated that patients compared to healthy controls perform worse and display alterations in brain activation during tasks of response inhibition. Go, no-go tasks, stop, signal tasks. The most prominent activation differences have been found in the frontal, striatal, and parietal regions, but alterations in activation of temporal and occipital and subcortical structures have also been reported. Current treatment guidelines for ADHD recommend a multimodal approach comprising of psychopharmacological and psychotherapeutic and psychoeducational interventions, meaning drugs and ideas and mental what's the word I'm looking for? Mental pathways. So basically adaptive skills, or psychoeducational, meaning we teach you new things on how to get around these attitudes. Interventions such as schedulings and making sure you stay on top of your schedule and making sure you follow a schedule and all of this other stuff, right? However, in light of considerable proportion of non-responders to medication, several side effects as well as personal preferences, there's strong need to develop alternative treatment approaches, meaning people don't like the side effects of these psychoactive drugs that affect your, yes, you can function, but you're lethargic, so therefore your energy yields are low, so therefore you are not feeling like yourself, therefore you're not going to perform at this level that you need to perform at in order to be functional. Physical exercise has been shown to improve cognitive functions in healthy and clinical populations. Since functions frequently impaired in ADHD seem to benefit from most physical exercise, exercise may be highly relevant for treatment of ADHD. Several studies have already demonstrated that a single session of aerobic exercise can lead to immediate improvements with executive functions in children with ADHD. In adults with ADHD, far fewer studies have examined the acute effects of exercise and results are far less clear. While Gapin found improved inhibitory control in college students with ADHD, post compared to pre-exercise, Fritz and O'Connor observed exercise-related enhancements in motivation and mood in a group of adult male patients, but no effects of exercise on attentional performance or hyperactivity. So therefore what they're saying is men with ADHD changed their moods, but there was no effects of exercise on attentional performance and hyperactivity. However, in a recent study from our lab, adults with ADHD showed improved reaction times and during a flanker's task following a 30-minute exercising compared to control conditions, which we interpret as enhancements in attentional processes and speed of processing due to acute exercise. I would actually go one step further and say sports, because you have to be in such detail-oriented mindset when you're playing a sport that you have to be paying attention to everything around you at that time. Excuse me for yawning. It's been a long day. Neurophysical mechanisms may account for the beneficial effects of acute exercise on cognition, include elevated arousal, catecholamine concentrations, brain-derived neurotropic factors, and cerebral blood flow. Increasingly, these mechanisms overlap with implicated in the pathology of ADHD, strengthening the assumption that patients with ADHD might particularly benefit from exercise. In addition, the suggested mechanisms are closely related to functioning of the prefrontal cortex, which could underlie the beneficial effects of exercise on the executive functions. Ooh, Jesus. While direct assessments of exercise-induced changes in central processes could have been conducted only in animal studies, the number of studies including electrophysiological measures to assess the neural effects of exercise in human participants is rapidly increasing. In children with ADHD, EEG studies have related acute exercise-induced improvements in cognition to changes in different components of the event-related potential. So let's move on because I'm not going to read all of this. This is a lot. Ooh, excuse me. Behavioral analysis says behavioral data analysis were performed during the SPS statistics, and four types of go no go task trials were classified: hits, correct responses to non-X letters, and omissions, omitted responses to non-X letters, and as indicators of the ability to sustain attention over time. The correct inhibitions, successful inhibitions of the responses to the X letter, and false alarms, failed inhibitions to the X letter, as indicators of the ability to inhibit a prepotent response. The proportions of hits, hit rate, number of hits, number of goal trials, and correct inhibitions were calculated as measures of accuracy. Based on the signal detection theory, the sensitivity index was computed. This is a bias-free measure of the subject's ability to discriminate targets from distractors, which is noise. In addition, mean reaction times and reaction time variabilities for hits were calculated. To examine effects of group conditions, exercise versus movie, mixed factorial repeated measures, and ANOVA was calculated. Pair t-test and two sample t-tests were used to investigate condition-specific and group differences. Our primary interest was in the effects of exercise on response inhibition. Therefore, we determined the sensitivity index as well as the correct inhibition rate as primary outcome measures. As response inhibition is difficult to separate from attentional processes and exercise might influence multiple aspects of executive functioning, we also defined the hit rate as a primary outcome measure. For those three measures, we applied von Ferroni correction to account for multiple comparisons. Significance level is P less than or equal to 0.017. Two-sided to account for different group differences in cardiorespiratory fitness levels, and based on previous studies showing that fitness might modulate the effects of acute exercise on cognition. We performed the main analysis and performance in control conditions in each group separately. For those exploratory analysis, we set the significance level to P.05. Okay, and perform no correction for multiple testing. Group means for behavioral measure was summarized for our primary outcome measures. They were neither interaction effects between groups and condition nor main effects of group or condition, including cardiorespiratory fitness, as covariate did not reveal different outcomes. In patients, correction inhibition rate in the control condition negatively correlated with the difference in correct inhibition rate between the two conditions. Patients with worse performance in the control condition show great exercise related enhancements. Note that one patient showed strong impairments in task performance, although correct understanding of the task was ensured during task instructions and the practice trial. Please note that this patient responded to 95% of the goal trials correctly, which is well within the range of the other patients included in the study, range of 91 to 100% correct of goal trials, and clearly shows that he did not perform on chance level. However, to account for this data extreme point, we decided to perform an additional, more robust correlational analysis using Spearman's rank order correlation and receive very similar results to the original analysis. In the healthy control group, there was no significant correlation between exercise-related behavioral performance changes and performance in the control condition. My goodness, sorry guys. The present study demonstrates effects of acute exercise on brain activation in adult patients with ADHD, which might be important for understanding the neural basis of exercise effects on executive function. As short-term effects of acute exercise are likely to accumulate to long-term changes in brain plasticity through exercise interventions, our results may be also relevant for developing alternative or add-on treatment approaches for ADHD. However, in our sample, exercise had no influence on behavioral task performance, which could be attributed to individual patient characteristics such as an already high performance level. Nevertheless, previous studies have demonstrated that changes in brain plasticity due to exercise can lead to improvements in cognitive function. Thus, investigating exercise effects in patients showing more severe impairments as well as long-term effects of exercise in ADHD could be a topic for future investigations. Okay, that's just one. I'm going to read this abstract real quick. This abstract is going to show that people with autism spectrum disorder encompasses a heterogeneous group with varying phenotypes and etiologies, right? Identifying pathogenic subgroups could facilitate targeted treatments. One promising avenue is investigating energy metabolism, as mitochondrial dysfunction has been implicated in a subgroup of ASD. Lactate, an indicator of energy metabolic anomaly, oh my God, my brain, may serve as potential biomarkers for this subgroup. So meaning they're saying that people who develop high levels of lactate as a substrate of energy yield may be a biomarker. This study aimed to examine cerebral lactate levels in high functioning adults with ASD, hypothesizing elevated mean lactic acid concentrations in contrast to neurotypical controls. Materials and methods: magnetic resonance spectroscopy was used to study cerebral lactic acid in 71 adults with ASD and NTC, focusing on posterior cingulate cortex. After quality control, 64 ASD and 58 NTC participants remained. Lactic acid levels 2 standard deviations above the mean of control group were considered elevated. Results mean that the lactic acid levels were significantly higher in the ASD group than in the NTC group. And 9.4% of the ASD group had elevated levels as compared to 0% of the NTCs. No significant correlation was found between blood serum lactate levels and derived lactic acid levels. Limitations. A cautious interpretation of our results is warranted due to a p-value of 0.02. In addition, a higher than anticipated proportion of data sets had to be excluded due to poor spectral quality. Conclusion: the study confirms the presence of elevated cerebral lactic acid levels in subgroups of adults with ASD. Suggestion: the potential of lactate as a biomarker for mitochondrial dysfunction in a subgroup of ASD. The lower than expected prevalence, 20%, was expected, and moderate increase required further investigation to elucidate the underlying mechanisms and relationships with mitochondrial function. So basically what they're saying is at this point, people with ASD has more lactic acid in their brains than the average person. Chronic physical activity for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and or spectral disorder in children. To explore the effects of physical activity intervention on executive function and motor skills among children with ADHD or ASD specifically. Here are the results. 11 studies involving 346 participants were finally identified. Physical activity elicited significant improvements in executive function and MS. What does MS stand for? Motor skills in children with ASD, ADHD. Regarding changes in executive function of participants, physical activity showed a great improvement in overall executive function. But no significant improvement in working memory. Significant improvements were also found in respect to gross motor skills, but no significant changes were found in fine motor skills. Conclusion: chronic physical activity interventions may promote executive function and motor skills in children with ADHD and ASD, especially in inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, and gross motor skills. However, physical activity interventions seem to have significant effects on working memory and fine motor skills to children with ADHD. So basically what they're saying is that after all of this, your gross motor skills and your executive function improves in children if you give them serious physical activity to do. Now, why is this important? It's important because real quick. I'm going to stop that. So, the truth is that giving your kids exercise, or I should say giving your kids psychoactive medications, is not the end all be all to a successful transition of a student with ADHD and or autism spectrum disorder. Exercise is the key. So for those of y'all who are wondering, what am I saying? Maybe your kid will benefit mightily, whether they're completely cerebral or not, in physical activity. Now, their gross motor movements will improve, but their fine motor skills may not. They will have to dig in more carefully to develop those fine motor skills. And what I mean by fine motor skills, those are movement of fingers, that is movement of slight movements of your body to understand your body in space. But gross motor movements will improve. But over time, your fine motor skills will improve anyway, because you're becoming an adult and you're practicing fine motor skills movements over that period of time as well. Your executive function, meaning the choices that you make, the decisions that you are going to make, will improve with more physical activity. I strongly advise anybody with ADHD or autism spectrum disorder to actually go about finding themselves a personal trainer, finding themselves active in gym, or even themselves finding a sport to play. Is it going to go over well with every ADHD or ASD kid? Probably not. But when you sit them down and explain to them, this is to help them become better functioning students, better functioning children, therefore becoming better functioning adults. I think the logical nature of your ASD children will begin to understand that and will embrace that particular style of intervention, as well as the medication. I would not tell anybody or advise anybody that is on a medication prescribed by a doctor to simply stop taking it and just go exercise. What I would do is go about it where I would ask, would they mind their children exercising as a result of their supposed disorder? When I say supposed, I'm meaning in the sense that I am not the expert to determine whether or not that they have the disorder, but I am an expert on how to manage children with the disorder. And one of the things that I usually do when my children, especially the ones that are ADHD or autism spectrum disordered, I have them go take a walk. Seriously, go take a walk. And you got 5 minutes. Come back. Do not stop. Walk. And then come back. Usually they come back better. Usually they come back ready to perform. And their behaviors do not exceed a certain level. So, I am not going to spend too much time over here because I don't have much to talk about in this particular subject matter. So I'm going to land this plane. As both a physical education professional and a special education professional, I cannot endorse exercise more for everybody's child, not just the ADHD, autism spectrum disorder children, but for all children, because it will help your children manage their energies a lot better. If you have a child that bounces off the walls, or if you have a child that's aloof, or if you have a child that literally cannot pay attention to anything past 30 seconds, these are the exercises that you should be doing. You should be working your kid out physically. I would personally wait to teach them to lift weights till a little bit later. I would probably say about 13, 14. But if your child is a child, I would act, regardless of what their age is, I would engage with them in physical activity as much as humanly possible throughout their everyday life until they reach that age where lifting weights is appropriate. And then I would introduce them to that, therefore pushing them to the final frontier that is health and fitness, and also behavior management within the educational setting. So if you are struggling bouncing off the walls, my strongest suggestion is to get to working. But that's what I think. Tell me what you guys think, and don't forget to like, subscribe, share, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube. Have a nice day. Be the best you. Class of Stoutt.